Hey guys! Tonight we're heading somewhere warm, dusty, golden, and humming with quiet life. You're standing on the edge of the Nile, a little before sunrise. The water looks like liquid bronze, and a cool breeze sneaks through the reeds. In the distance, the faint silhouettes of palm trees and mud brick homes begin to wake up. Somewhere, a donkey brays in protest at the coming day. The horizon blushes pink, then amber, and you can smell something soft and sweet drifting through the air. Yeast, maybe, or the promise of breakfast. You probably wouldn't survive long here. The sand is hot even at dawn, and the mosquitoes mean business. But you've arrived at one of history's most comforting scenes, an Egyptian morning around 1450 BCE, when bread and beer are about to meet in a bubbling, fragrant ritual of daily life. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The Nile murmurs at your side. Boats made from papyrus reeds slide past, their sails catching the early wind. Fishermen call to one another in voices too lazy for arguments. The light catches on the wet clay of the riverbank, and already people are at work. You see a line of women carrying baskets of grain balanced effortlessly on their heads. Each step stirs a puff of dust, a kind of early morning incense. You follow the smell of yeast and charcoal smoke toward a small cluster of mud brick buildings. This is the bakery, heart of the village, though nobody calls it that. Here, the bakers sleep little, talk softly, and wield paddles like conductors of some flower-filled orchestra. A man in a linen kilt nods at you as he tosses kindling into a small clay oven shaped like a fat, upside-down pot. The air ripples with heat. This early, the temperature isn't unbearable yet, but by noon you'll swear the sun has personal grievances against your skin. He tells you, well, mostly gestures because you don't speak his dialect, that the bread isn't just food. It's fuel, currency, and offering all in one. Every household relies on it. Every worker is paid partly in it. Even the gods, he claims, expect their morning loaf. There's a comfort in that predictability. Behind him, a boy no older than 10 grinds barley on a stone quern. He pushes back and forth with rhythmic patience. It's a slow process, grains crushed into coarse meal, then finer until it's almost like sand. He hums under his breath. Maybe something his mother sings when the house is quiet. The sound is strangely hypnotic. You find your breathing sinking to his rhythm. Historians still argue whether the bakers of this era worked for the temple, the palace, or the people first. Evidence leans all ways. But it doesn't really matter here, in this sleepy workshop where dawn light falls across baskets of golden grain. The world is simple. Grind, mix, bake, repeat. The baker shows you his hands, cracked, dusted permanently white from flour and ash. He jokes that his wife says he smells like beer, even when he hasn't had any. You laugh softly, unsure if you should admit that he really does smell like a brewery in summer. Outside, the sky brightens to full gold. The Nile gleams so hard it's almost painful to look at. Birds circle lazily, gossiping about breakfast scraps. Somewhere, someone begins pounding laundry against the stones, the sound blending with the dull thud of querns and the sigh of the oven. A lazy cat drifts through the doorway, tail flicking like it owns the place. The baker tosses it a crumb. It ignores him. Typical cat behavior, apparently timeless. You wander toward the back of the workshop. Clay jars line the wall, each sealed with a plug of mud. Some hold flour, others something darker and sticky, fermenting mash. The air carries a faint tang, equal parts pleasant and suspicious, like wet bread left too long in the sun. You can almost taste it on your tongue. The baker scoops a handful of barley from one jar, lets it pour between his fingers like sand. Good harvest, he might be saying. Or maybe too many rats. Hard to tell. You nod wisely either way. He gestures for you to help carry a basket of grain to the grinding area. You oblige, muscles complaining slightly. Barley is heavier than it looks, especially in woven baskets that creak with every step. But the movement feels grounding. You're part of something ancient and ordinary. By now, the first streaks of smoke curl lazily from the chimney hole. The smell intensifies, earthy, alive, almost sweet. The baker calls to his helper to bring water from the Nile. "Don't fall in," he warns, with a grin that suggests someone recently did. A woman passes by outside, balancing a jar of beer on her shoulder. She nods politely. Beer at this hour isn't unusual here. It's breakfast. Low in alcohol, high in calories, and probably safer than the river water. You wonder fleetingly whether humanity's oldest health plan was simply drink beer instead. You step out into the courtyard for a moment. The sunlight is full now, and the village hums. Children chase each other, old men argue about taxes, and a priest walks by muttering into the wind. Over everything, that same scent of barley and yeast floats like invisible music. You take a slow breath. The warmth seeps into your bones, and you realize that this place, this dusty corner of the Bronze Age, already feels oddly familiar. Maybe because every breakfast since then is in some small way repeating this same ritual: grain, fire, and patience. The baker waves you back inside. He's ready to mix. His face gleams with sweat, but his smile is easy. You get the sense he's done this every day of his life, and will keep doing it until he can't lift the paddle anymore. The oven sighs again, hungry for dough. Somewhere in that breath of heat, you can almost hear the heartbeat of civilization itself. Inside the mud brick bakery, the light feels different. It's dim but golden, like being inside a loaf that hasn't quite baked yet. The air is thick with dust and steam, and when you breathe in, it tastes faintly like toasted grain. A few torches gutter against the walls, leaving trails of smoke that curl lazily toward the low ceiling. Every corner hums quietly with motion, hands kneading, feet shuffling, soft laughter here and there. You take a step closer to the main work table, if you can call it that, a long plank balanced across 2 clay jars, scarred with years of chopping and rolling. The baker's apprentices work around it like bees circling a hive. One sprinkles water, another measures flour, and a third hums tunelessly while scraping the dough from the cracks. The head baker, your friend from earlier, snaps his fingers and someone brings in a bundle of dried reeds tied with twine. They'll use them later for the oven fire. For now, he gestures at you with a crooked grin and a lump of dough the size of your head. It's soft, almost alive, sticky enough to grab your fingers. He presses it into your hands, and suddenly you're part of the morning shift. It's heavier than it looks, and the heat of the room makes it clingy. You slap it onto the table and try to mimic the others. Fold, push, twist. Your movements are clumsy, but everyone pretends not to notice. They've seen worse. You watch their rhythm, the quiet choreography of bread making. They don't count, they just feel. The dough must be pliant but not limp, moist but not soggy. No timers, no written recipes, just intuition and the memory of how the dough sounded yesterday. It's oddly meditative, the same gesture over and over until your arms ache in a satisfying way. The head baker murmurs something about how every loaf has a spirit. You assume he's joking until he draws a small symbol in the flour with his fingertip. A half-moon shape, the mark of the household deity who watches over their bread. It's both superstition and quality control, apparently. Historians still argue whether Egyptian bakers worked mostly for temples or private estates. But standing here, it feels like neither. It's more personal. Family-sized batches of faith and fatigue rolled together. The bread is sacred because it's what keeps everyone moving, from farmers to priests. Someone near the oven sneezes dramatically. The entire room pauses, then bursts into laughter. The baker wipes his face with the corner of his kilt and mutters something that sounds suspiciously like, "The gods bless this sneeze." You can't help smiling. Even here, thousands of years before the invention of comedy clubs, humans already know the power of a good sneeze joke. You glance around. On one wall, tiny shelves hold clay molds shaped like inverted cones. Each is dusted with flour and lined up neatly, waiting for its turn in the fire. Those are for the beer bread, a magical combination of 2 necessities. The molds look simple, but the baker swears that every family has its own secret shape or curve to the cone. Some swear the steeper ones give a fluffier crumb. Others claim they make better froth for beer. It's the kind of argument that probably ends friendships. The apprentices carry water from the Nile in clay jars. You notice how carefully they pour it. Too much, and the dough collapses. Too little, and it cracks. The baker dips a finger, tastes the water, then nods. It's still cool enough to use. He explains that water from the river's edge tastes different each week. After floods, it's richer, sweeter. You decide not to question how that's possible and simply accept that the Nile itself is a collaborator here. The floor is hard-packed earth, and every few minutes someone sweeps it with palm fronds to keep the flour from turning into mud underfoot. Your toes stick slightly, and you can feel the warmth of the oven radiating across the room. Sweat rolls down your temple, but it's not unpleasant, just part of the atmosphere. An elderly woman enters carrying a small pot. She ladles a frothy liquid into several cups, a thin, tangy beer brewed from leftover dough. Everyone takes a sip, including you. It's sour, fizzy, and vaguely comforting, like drinking liquid bread. One apprentice smacks his lips and declares, "Perfect breakfast." You agree, mostly because your mouth is still deciding what it just experienced. The baker explains that the line between baker and brewer is blurry. The same mash that starts a loaf can, if left alone a little too long, turn into beer. Sometimes intentionally, sometimes not. He chuckles, saying, "The gods invented fermentation. We just try not to mess it up." At one corner of the room, a woman sings softly as she shapes smaller loaves for her family. Her voice carries easily, floating above the hiss of the fire and the scrape of stone. You don't understand the words, but the tune feels familiar, a melody that might still live somewhere deep in human memory. She tells you, through gestures, that the bread she's making will be baked quickly, flat like a pancake, and eaten before noon. The larger ones, though, are for temple offerings. They'll be baked twice, first to rise, then to harden, and then painted with honey. She winks as if to say, "The gods have a sweet tooth, too." A dog trots in, hopeful eyes fixed on the dough scraps. Someone tosses him a piece, and he devours it instantly. The baker warns, "Careful, he'll steal your loaf if you turn away." You test the theory by pretending to look elsewhere, and sure enough, the dog inches closer. You laugh, shoo him gently, and the room echoes with amusement. Time slips by unnoticed. The torches burn low, and the oven glows brighter. The baker finally inspects your dough, presses a finger into it, and nods approvingly. You might make a half-decent apprentice after all, assuming you survive the heat. You hear him call for a break. The workers step outside, stretching their arms. You follow, blinking against the sunlight. The Nile breeze feels cool and forgiving now, carrying a faint sweetness of baking bread. You glance back at the workshop and realize how much life happens in that small, smoky space. Generations have passed through it, each leaving invisible fingerprints in the flour dust. The baker grins, holding up his cup of beer bread brew. "To breakfast," he says. You raise an imaginary glass and whisper it back, and somewhere behind you, the oven breathes again. You wake the next morning, or at least it feels like morning again, though time in this dusty corner of Egypt doesn't behave the same way it does in your world. The air inside the bakery is cooler now, shadows longer, and the baker has already begun sorting through sacks of grain stacked neatly along the wall. Each sack is labeled with tiny ink marks, an early kind of bookkeeping. He gestures for you to come closer. "Barley emmer," he says, pointing first to the pale grains, then to the darker, plumper ones. These are the heart of every loaf, the twin pillars of ancient Egyptian cuisine. You crouch beside him and scoop a handful of barley into your palm. It's light, dry, and surprisingly clean. He explains, through gestures and a few patient words, that barley is hearty, reliable, the worker's grain. Emmer wheat, by contrast, is softer and sweeter, often saved for temple bread or royal meals. Together they make the ideal texture. Barley for body, emmer for flavor. It's an old partnership, perfected long before anyone thought to write down a recipe. Historians still argue whether emmer was cultivated more for bread or for brewing. You can see why. The grain itself seems to sit on the fence, sturdy enough for dough, aromatic enough for drink. Some modern scholars even think ancient farmers deliberately grew both side by side, just in case the Nile's mood ruined one crop. The baker leads you outside to the grain yard, the house where sunlight catches on the fine dust rising from wooden sieves. Two women sit cross-legged, shaking the grain in flat baskets so that husks flutter away like pale snowflakes. The sound is soft, rhythmic, and oddly soothing. Swish, pat, pause. They hum quietly as they work, voices weaving through the steady whisper of falling grain. It's the kind of sound you could fall asleep to. A cat lounges under one of the baskets, occasionally batting at the drifting husks. Nobody seems to mind. In fact, one woman grins and tosses him a stray kernel. Cats here are half coworkers, half royalty. You're not sure which half is larger. The baker picks up a handful of cleaned barley, pours it into a shallow clay bowl, and adds a splash of water from a nearby jar. He stirs it with his fingers, testing how quickly it absorbs. Good grain drinks fast, he explains, wringing the water through his fingers. The phrase sounds like poetry, or maybe a proverb. Either way, you nod wisely again. Nearby, a young apprentice kneels beside a large grinding stone. The surface gleams from years of use, and a small pile of flour grows in front of him like a miniature dune. He works methodically, back and forth, pressing the stone with his weight. You can almost feel the burn in his shoulders. His rhythm is steady, hypnotic, grind, lift, exhale. If ancient Egypt had meditation apps, this sound would top the charts. You crouch to watch closer. The flour that emerges isn't like modern powder. It's coarse, grainy, speckled with fragments of bran. You imagine it must make a dense, hearty bread, something that tastes like labor and sunlight. The baker joins you, scoops a pinch onto his tongue, and nods. Strong flour, he says. Then, after a moment's thought, he adds, strong people. He leads you back inside where large ceramic bowls wait. Each is half filled with freshly ground flour. He sprinkles a little salt, not from a shaker, of course, but from a small linen pouch, and gestures for you to mix it with your hands. The texture is rough, but comforting. You drag your fingers through it, watching tiny clouds rise in the light streaming from the doorway. There's a smell now, faintly nutty, dry, alive. He explains that the flour won't be used immediately. It needs to rest, breathe. In Egypt's heat, even flour seems to inhale the air around it. A quiet joke spreads among the workers, something about how the grain knows the Nile's secrets. You don't quite get it, but everyone chuckles softly, and that's enough. Jokes here aren't meant to be funny so much as friendly, little bridges between exhaustion and routine. Later, as the day grows hotter, you watch the baker lay out small cloths across the floor, each holding a different blend of flour. Some have more emmer, some more barley. He's experimenting. Ancient quality control. He pinches a bit of each and crumbles it between his fingers, nodding or frowning thoughtfully. It's not unlike a modern chef testing recipes, only with fewer measuring cups and more intuition. You notice that one bowl has something extra mixed in. Tiny bits of dried date. He winks and whispers, "For the children." A kind of proto-dessert, you realize. So the ancient sweet tooth wasn't limited to the gods after all. Outside, the hum of daily life continues. The splash of water, the chatter of women washing clothes, the squeak of donkeys. You can smell other breakfasts cooking in nearby homes. Lentils, onions, maybe a hint of roasted fish. But the bakery's scent overpowers them all. You find yourself wondering what it feels like to live your entire life centered on grain, to measure your days by how the dough rises, to think of barley as both food and fortune. The baker, sensing your thoughtfulness, pats your shoulder. Grain is patient, he says, so we must be too. Historians still debate how these small village bakeries tied into the massive state granaries. Some believe every community sent a portion of their flour as tax. Others think the local loaves were simply too essential to give away. Whatever the truth, you sense that every scoop of flour connects to something vast, a network of fields, canals, and human hands. By afternoon, the last of the grain is stored, the flour covered with cloth. The baker stretches his back and sighs. Tomorrow, he says, we make it sing. You glance at the flour-filled bowls and smile. The stage is set for alchemy. As you step outside, the light is fierce and honey-colored. The Nile glitters in the distance, and the air hums with insects. You close your eyes and imagine the countless mornings that began this same way. Grain, water, laughter. Every loaf you've ever eaten is somehow descended from this moment. The baker calls after you, holding up a small handful of barley. Never waste it, he says. Even the gods count grains. You nod, pocketing one for luck. It's still warm from the sun. Back inside, the day has turned heavy with heat. The bakery walls shimmer faintly where sunlight presses against the clay. The baker moves slower now, conserving his energy, but his eyes are alive with focus. He gestures for you to come closer, to look into one of the large jars set beside the wall. You peer in, and the smell hits first. Tangy, earthy, a little sour, like a forgotten lunchbox that somehow turned miraculous instead of tragic. This! he says, tapping the rim of the jar, is life. Inside, a pale, bubbling mass shifts lazily, yeast at work, the dough's ghost cousin. You lean in further, fascinated. It looks alive, and in a way it is. This is fermentation, Egypt's accidental gift to the future. The baker explains through gestures and a patient smile that they discovered this magic by mistake, leaving dough out overnight, returning to find it risen and fragrant instead of stale. From disaster to delight. Historians still argue whether that discovery happened here along the Nile or elsewhere first. Some say Mesopotamia, others swear Egypt perfected it. But here in this sleepy bakery, ownership doesn't matter. The baker doesn't care who found it first. He only cares that it works, every single day. He lifts the lid fully and a soft hiss escapes, like a sigh of contentment. He grins. It's hungry, he jokes, sprinkling a pinch of fresh flour into the bubbling mass. The mixture stirs as if responding to his voice. You imagine it whispering back, "Thank you, chef." He tells you that they call it the mother. Without it, no bread will rise. Each batch of dough borrows a little from the last, a living thread of continuity stretching across generations. Every loaf you've ever eaten in some strange way carries the breath of the first fermented dough that ever existed. You find that thought comforting and slightly unsettling. Humanity's longest-running chain reaction, all because someone forgot to clean a bowl. A nearby apprentice adds water, stirring slowly with a carved wooden stick. The smell deepens, like apples, vinegar, and summer heat. You can almost hear the yeast working, tiny bubbles forming, invisible gas building life into the mix. The baker tears off a small piece of fresh dough from yesterday's batch and tosses it into another jar. We feed the old one, we borrow the young, he says. You nod, pretending to understand the full mystical rhythm of his routine. In truth, you're mostly mesmerized by how ordinary and miraculous it feels at once. As he stirs, he tells you a story, half in gestures, half in words. Once, a baker's apprentice supposedly tried to bake bread without waiting for the dough to rise. The result? Flat as a sandal. The townspeople laughed so much that for weeks they called him Flat Loaf. You can't help but chuckle softly. Ancient workplace nicknames, apparently another timeless human tradition. The baker laughs too, shoulders shaking. He pats the jar affectionately and says, "Patience. That's the real secret ingredient." You walk over to another corner where several clay jugs are sealed with palm fiber stoppers. The smell here is sharper, beer in the making. The baker notices your curiosity and lifts one lid. The froth spills gently over, fizzing with energy. It's warm, earthy, alive in the same way the dough is. Same mother, he explains. One for bread, one for beer. Sisters. You blink, realizing what he means. The same yeast culture, sometimes the same mash, creates both the loaf and the drink. Beer bread, bread beer. Two forms of the same divine chemistry. Historians still debate whether the Egyptians thought of beer as food or drink. But here, it clearly doesn't matter. A sip and a bite, both filling, both sacred, both every day. The baker scoops a bit of the foamy beer into a small clay cup and hands it to you. You sip carefully. It's warm, cloudy, and not unpleasant, like liquid bread that's been sunbathing too long. You can taste the grain, the tang of fermentation, the faint whisper of history. You hand the cup back, smiling. He nods approvingly and wipes his hands on his apron. Then, in a quieter tone, he adds, "Sometimes the beer goes wrong." He opens another jar and sniffs. His nose wrinkles. Too sour. Bad spirit. He gestures as if to ward off evil. Apparently, not every batch survives the whims of the yeast gods. A fly buzzes lazily near the jars. He waves it away, muttering something under his breath, probably a mild curse or blessing. You imagine him saying, "Even flies love good beer." The heat presses down harder now, but you hardly notice. The baker hums softly as he tends to the jars, a sound that blends perfectly with the faint bubbling of fermentation. It's the quiet music of creation, gentle, repetitive, deeply human. He scoops out a small bowl of the fermenting mix and sets it beside the fresh flour from yesterday. Tomorrow, they'll marry the two, and the magic will continue. You realize that this process hasn't changed in spirit for thousands of years. Somewhere, even today, a baker is feeding a starter that could trace its ancestry back to this same idea, to this same moment beside the Nile. Before you leave the jars behind, the baker offers one last demonstration. He dips his finger into the froth and touches it to his tongue. Then, without warning, he does the same to you. The taste is startling, sour and alive, like licking a lightning bolt made of bread. He laughs at your expression. Good, he says. Means it breathes. The baker turns toward the oven, satisfied. Tomorrow, we bake for the gods, he adds casually as if it's no big deal. You realize this isn't just about food anymore. It's faith, science, routine, all kneaded into one endless cycle. As you watch the bubbling jars, you think of how strange it is that civilization rose partly on the backs of something so small you can't even see it. Tiny organisms that turned grain into sustenance, chaos into comfort. You sit quietly, listening to the soft fizzing sound. It's almost like a lullaby, the gentle breath of yeast, whispering across millennia. Rest, rise, repeat.